Harry Winks, everybody. But something that doesn't need further ado, and maybe the only thing that is more entertaining than big box office weekends on holidays like this one was, is the review of the week that was VAR. And it was another very interesting week for all the people who support VAR, especially those who try to find reasons why or reasons that it's still working. Because I got to be honest, the more I deal with this thing, the more I realize it's really not working, not one bit. So we'll start with the first match of the weekend, which was Friday afternoon. Rock bottom Southampton taking on top four challenger Brighton, who was trying to go top of the table. Um, Southampton thought they had scored a dramatic late second goal to take the lead. It turns out it was chalked off for offsides. I don't know if I have a bigger problem with the call, the application of the call, or the fact that it took 5.5 minutes to get to the call. Did you see it, Paul? What is your stance on it? And when will they make any sense of the inconsistency?
I did see it. I hate this interpretation of the law in general, just because I feel like it lets goalkeepers massively off the hook in general. I mean, by application of the law, they probably got this right. I think the biggest problem I have with it is the fact that it took over 5 minutes, because that tells me that they were looking at all the wrong things and they didn't agree on it. Like, to me, like if you're looking at this chronologically, you start with the the first player to the ball there that you think may be offsides. I think, or maybe interfering with play, right? I think the problem that I have with is this thing reeks of, we were looking at in having it sounds to me like there was a disagreement over whether he was interfering or not, and they decided, oh, let's go to the second player and see if he's offsides, because that will be an easier explanation. Then couldn't get that one, so then they went back to the original conversation. That order of operation leads you to a 5 minute situation. So
Right.
yeah.
And that's the part that I hated, because the second one doesn't even matter if the first one isn't adjudged to be a foul, or isn't adjudged to be or is adjudged to be causing the goalkeeper problems. And I think it just comes down to what was called on the field compared to what was easiest to explain. I do feel for Southampton, and I do feel for the smaller clubs. It does always feel like they're the ones that take the short end of the stick here. They are the ones that always seem to come up on the loose end of it, whether it's Wolves. Luton felt aggrieved by a lot of these calls last year. And I understand they're trying to kind of change the way that they're using these plays and using these calls, but this is the whole problem too with the semi-automated offsides. Because if you had the semi-automated offsides in place right now and working, of course, well, then you wouldn't have had to take 3.5 to 4 minutes for your bullshit reasoning of trying to go to the second call, because you would have quickly realized he was onside, and therefore you needed to deal with the first call. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you should get the call right on the field. And if you don't, you should quickly correct it with instant replay. Like this whole clear and obvious, this whole I think that's where the muddiness is of all these different plays. And I just don't know how any play like this will ever come into it. So we've seen this a lot of times, right? It is hard because trying to do a dummy on a ball, or acting as if you're going to do a flick on a ball, could make the defender and or the keeper react in a certain way. In this instance, did Adam Armstrong have any bearing whatsoever on where Verbruggen is going to be and what the outcome of that play is going to be when the ball finds its way to Archer's foot?
Not for me. And really, like what you're saying with this interpretation of this rule and the way it's called is that you're going to expect an attacking player to have the awareness that when he's in a goal scoring position, not to dummy in case he affects play. Like that's absolutely ridiculous. Nobody's going to be thinking like that in that moment, or should they be?
So maybe a game that had probably the highest amount of VAR controversy, topics, reviews is the match that had, I think, the most amount of goals. both in the first half and in the total match, which was West Ham and Arsenal. Arsenal comes out rampant, scoring goals left and right, but they weren't without controversy and or discussion. So first one I think is a pretty quick one. Paqueta wanted the foul in the build-up on Timber, I think it was, on him in the box on the lead up to the first goal. I think in that one, that was Gabrielle's header. And God, if there's ever anything more guaranteed than Gabrielle scoring on a header, it's ridiculous. Like they'll talk about it and then it happens, and you're like, oh, and there he is, and he scores. But Gabrielle on that one, there's only been one goal this season in the Premier League chalked off due to a foul in the buildup. And shockingly enough, it was Southampton against Wolves, what would have been a game-winning goal. But I guess my question to you is, was it more about the fact that Paqueta's trying to really buy one there? Or is it that the Premier League has said, unless it is an egregious foul in the buildup, we don't want to be chalking off goals for random plays in buildup, because then we have to define how far back we go to check these things.
I think it's both, and I'll put a third layer in. I think that's probably even a higher threshold when there's a Brazilian involved, right? So, like, I think, like, to me, it just, like, when I first saw it, I thought for sure it was a pen, and then, like, when they showed the replay, I was like, oh, he just completely sold it. Like, he really did sell it. There's not a lot of contact there. I don't think even if you watch the player's reaction around him, like, nobody even really he didn't lobby too hard for it.
No, he actually didn't, and his teammates didn't either. But the fact that they looked at it as long as they did made me think, oh, they might chalk this goal off. But then I was like, that would be really, really soft, and that's kind of a weird way. Now, we want to talk about soft. We'll talk about the second big talking point, which was the penalty awarded. Awarded to Saka for the foul on Paqueta, goal taken by Odegaard. I've seen a ton on this one. Some call it a dive, some call it a soft penalty. Others point to similar situations this year where when it's called on the field, it doesn't get overturned because there's minimal contact. Like, where do you land on this one? What was your gut when you saw it? Real time, what's your gut after thinking about it, reading?
I think it's soft, but I think we saw like a half a dozen of these this weekend. I felt like that were soft, and I do feel like they're pretty consistently calling it. And I also do feel like if that happens in the middle of the pitch, they're probably calling it still. You know what I mean? Like he went in, missed, and got contact. Like, I mean, it's not significant contact, but it's definitely there. He didn't get any of the ball, and he's in a spot where that happens and the foul is called. That's what you're going to get as a penalty. I didn't have that big of a problem. I do think it's soft, but I do think it's been being called that way across the board. And I think if you don't get ball and you do get man, even if it's, you know, not a lot of contact, you're opening yourself up there to that liability.
Yeah, I don't think it was a stone penalty by any means. I don't think that you could guarantee that it's a penalty any day of the week. I also think that in this league where they say things like that's too soft to be given as a penalty, or that's not enough contact to award a penalty. I think I've seen that. I've seen a lot more contact get reviewed by VAR and not be given, or not ask the guy to come look at the monitor. And I think this is where I have the issue with the inconsistency of it, is that I think there's contact like that all the time in the box. Way more on corners or even on attempts sometimes. And I don't think they ever end up asking to review it. So to like almost stand behind that it was enough to give the penalty, it's hard for me because I'm like talking out of both sides of my mouth. I want to be consistent with the application of the law, but then I want on-field referees to do the refereeing and not wait for the video to do it. So I probably should be commending them. He called the penalty. He called it a penalty and didn't wait for VAR to fix it, because in that instance, VAR wouldn't have fixed it, which is one of those chicken and the egg things, I think, is why I struggle with that one. Last one in that match was the Gabriel Uma face when Fabianski decided to come out and just plant at Gabriel. Anthony Taylor almost looked like he was apologizing to Bowen when he explained why it was a penalty. Do you think that was just Taylor realizing in the moment, like, I don't need VAR for this. I know what I just saw. That's a penalty. He just cleaned this dude's clock.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it was a pretty obvious, like, you didn't need to slow that replay down much to see that one coming out. Like, he wasn't even close.
And Fabianski didn't really fight it. All
Right.
he really did was care about Gabriel's well-being because he
Yeah.
knew I just cocked this guy in the face. And
Yeah.
he did miss it. I mean, it wasn't like he got a knuckle on it. He missed it by 1.5 feet. I mean,
Right.
I don't even know if he was I don't think he was getting anywhere near it if Gabriel's big fat face wasn't right there. Like, I think he basically had, like, you would, if that was Timuchin punching Gabriel Jesus in the face, I would have been like, oh, he didn't even look for the ball. Like, I would have thought to myself, like, that was basically Fabianski was Timuchin going at Jesus in that moment. And that's kind of what I thought, actually, to be totally honest, as I saw it. Probably lets you know how disturbing of a human being I am. But we'll move on to the big match of the weekend, Liverpool versus Manchester City. The only real VAR big talking point of that match, of course, was whether or not they might chalk off the Diaz penalty. I still don't understand why anyone talks about this. It's a penalty all day for me. There is contact. Even without the contact, he's required to jump 2 feet in the air to not get his leg broken as a guy comes barreling out and has no chance of getting the ball. Like, it's a penalty all day for me. I think all in all, I thought Chris Kavanagh actually had a decent day, which I never really say about Chris Kavanagh. I don't think he was good. I also think how weak Manchester City was made it easy because only one team actually gave any effort. So there really wasn't a reason to worry about his officiating too much. Like, was there any moment in your mind you thought that there was a chance that VAR was going to overturn that penalty, even knowing it was Paul Tierney?
Well, there always is, especially when Manchester City's involved, right? But I thought it was a pretty cynical challenge, and I thought City honestly was pretty lucky not to get a straight red on it. I mean, they say that Diaz knocked the ball out of the path, and that's why it wasn't a direct goal scoring opportunity. I mean, I think if Diaz gets up and over, he's scoring that. So, I don't know. I thought they were pretty lucky that way. I wasn't. I mean, I would have been shocked if they overturned, but like again, we've seen worse things happen in a City match before.
I think triple jeopardy would have come into play there because he was at least trying to play the ball. Like, he came out to play the ball. He misses it completely. But if he just gets the player there, I think you're probably right. I think because you're giving the penalty and he was cautioned with a yellow, I think that's probably why the referee could use that. And he was going wide. I know what you're saying, but I think that's they got rid of that whole triple jeopardy thing a few years back, which
Yeah, I guess I
probably
just
is a
don't. I
mistake.
think
But
you can make the argument he came out for the ball and tried to play the ball. I think I saw it as more cynical than that, and maybe that's my red bias, but I think to me it seemed like a very professional tackle in the way that he came out at that angle. I think he knew he wasn't getting there.
well, I don't think he thought he was going to get there. I think he hoped that maybe by rushing out the way he did, that Diaz would slow down or something. He would take a touch and take it away. I also think, this is what happens when you play a backup keeper who's made 3 appearances in 3.5 months in a huge ass match like this, and you start tinkering and really, really kind of taking it under. So real quick, last one. There were a few other ones that we could have talked about. Some of the offsides calls, some of the goals that were scored, the penalty on Evangelson. I mean, there were felt like 100 penalties in that game. But I wanted to get your take on the Tom Carney red card, Fulham versus Spurs.
Knew you're gonna love that one. It's the identical challenge that you wanted Ndidi sent off on Palmer for. It's the same challenge. Yeah.
I just don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't understand how it was a red card this week and not last week. Now, I will say this. I thought it was a red card last week. I think it's a red card this week. Like, and again, we this thing where the referees. Now, I will say this is what I do like. I think the ref thought he saw it right.
About that, I think what sucks about it is that it's inconsistently applied, right? And VAR doesn't change any of that because it doesn't overturn either of them.
Correct. And that's, I think my whole problem is that ultimately those referees should be getting both of those calls right.
Yeah.
As red cards. If you can't see blatant reds right in front of you, and I mean, these are happening on arguably the best player, and I know it's crazy to say that, but it's true. Kulusevski is Spurs' best player. Anyone who's watched them all season long knows, like, Son Heung-min might be the most talented. Solanke might be the highest buy. Kulusevski is the reason they're where they are, as inconsistent as they are in the table. To have him have that horror challenge, and it was a horror challenge. And I mean, Palmer's one of the 5 brightest stars in the entire league. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're not protecting those players, how can you have any faith for what you're doing for the rest of the players? So we'll get back.